Or good morning to everyone joining us today. On behalf of the organizers of this event, the Zero Tolerance Initiative, the Forest Peoples Program, Impact from Kenya, Asia Indigenous Peoples Pact, IDCEP, the Business and Human Rights Resource Center, and the International Work Group for Indigenous Affairs, I would like to welcome to this event Voices from the Ground, tackling the growing threats to human rights defenders, indigenous leaders, and communities through business and government respect for collective rights. My name is Lola Garcia-Lix, and I am the Senior Advisor on Global Governance in the International Work Group for Indigenous Affairs, and I will help to facilitate the event today. The background or the rationale behind the event, of course, is that one of the key demands raised by indigenous rights defenders at the Forum on Business and Human Rights that took place the last 3 days, as well as in the COP26 held in Glasgow, was for collective land rights of indigenous peoples to be recognized. The Zero Tolerance Initiative works, as well as the organizations that are organizing that event, has emphasized that the lack of recognition and implementation of collective rights of indigenous peoples is a key driver of attacks against them. This event will then intend to demonstrate how greater respect for land rights is crucial both for the success of the UN Guiding Principles implementations in the next decade and to the success of the climate agreement coming out of the COP26. At the heart of both of these two processes lies the safety of human rights defenders who are negatively impacted by poor implementation of collective land rights, but are the key to the defense of land rights, environment, and forests, and are crucial partners in informing responsible business practices. We will have today here with us 4 indigenous leaders, right defenders, that I will introduce to you later on. We will also have one of the members of the Working Group on Business and Human Rights to make some introductory remarks and also some closing remarks. After the presentations of our speakers today, it will be 30 minutes to engage in a dialogue with. We have allocated 30 minutes for that. For those who are interested to raise questions or make comments to the speakers, please use the chat or the Q&A functions in the Zoom. Please introduce yourself, write your name and the country or the organization or institution, and who are you targeting the question to, which of the speakers. Interpretation is available during the whole event in Spanish, Russian, and in English. So I think with this short introduction, I will introduce Anita Ramasastry, who is a member of the United Nations Working Group on Business and Human Rights. Anita is also a founding co-editor-in-chief of the Business and Human Rights Journal published by the Cambridge University Press. She is the co-president of the Global Business and Human Rights Scholars Association. This is a very short bio. A more thorough bio will be available in the chat. Anita, thank you very much for joining us today. We are really pleased to have you here. And I know that you have been incredibly busy the last 3 days during the forum. So we really greatly appreciate that you are with us. So Anita, we would very much like you to introduce or make some introductory remarks to this event after the 3 days of the forum. And so please, Anita, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Lola, and thank you to all the partner organizations that have organized this event today. It's indeed actually my pleasure and honor to be here today with you, and I look forward to hearing from the different speakers and their perspectives, as the event mentions, from the ground. I'm here just to provide some overview of the Working Group on Business and Human Rights and our ongoing efforts to support the important work of Indigenous communities and human rights defenders, including land and environmental defenders, women's rights defenders, and really defenders globally. I'll first begin by saying that one of the things that we do as the Working Group on Business and Human Rights to support communities and to support human rights defenders is that we engage with governments around the world. And we also engage in country visits. I will say that in many countries we have visited across all continents, the issue of collective land rights is one that repeats itself in every jurisdiction. We have seen communities lose access to communal lands in the name of any number of business projects, be it often mining or infrastructure projects. So we have repeatedly highlighted this in our reports to the UN and in our recommendations to particular countries. So I just want to say that the issue and discussion today is one that we very much appreciate, because we see and understand that this is a problem where we must work together. The second point is that we also see around the world, and again, we had an event at the UN Forum on Business and Human Rights in partnership with many of the same organizations here today, focusing on the rights of human rights defenders and the increasing threats to their safety and to their ability to actually represent people and to speak publicly of business and its abuse of human rights. So we, again, in our visits to countries around the world, from Honduras to Kenya to Thailand, to name some, we see the same challenges for defenders. So we hear you, we see you, we thank you for your work, but we want to help be part of the solution so you can continue to do your work. So this is why I was asked to be here today. We recently published something called the UN Guiding Principles and Guidance on Ensuring Respect for Human Rights Defenders. So this guidance, which is being translated into 3 languages, and I think there may be some links in the chat to the guidance, is really taking the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights and looking at the role of states or governments, the role of business in ensuring that human rights defenders' rights are respected. So this is very focused on defenders. And what that does is it really provides very specific and practical recommendations for how we can begin to change the current situation. And the current situation, as you all know, is that there are increasing threats, increasing use of the legal process in different countries, criminalization, using criminal process in the courts, using litigation, strategic litigation to silence defenders. And of course, even more concerning is the risk to people's lives and physical security. So where do we begin? The first thing we have done is make recommendations to states. There are states where defenders are working, and the governments there may be the ones that are causing the harm or a part of the harm. So our advice is also to the governments where the corporations, the mining companies, the natural resource companies are actually located, the headquarters. And we say to governments, you have a responsibility to make sure that your companies are not harming defenders or are not connected to harm to defenders. Sometimes it's not the company, but it's their security force, or it is a local government, or it is some other actor related to the business project. But we say it is the government state responsibility to take steps to regulate those corporations and to make sure there are consequences if there is harm or a risk to a defender's security. And so we are starting to see this, at least on paper. Canada has made a commitment in its human rights defenders policy that if a company is connected to risk to defenders, it may lose certain kinds of government support and financing. This is just an example. But more importantly is Pillar 2. We say companies have their own responsibility to respect the rights of defenders. This means using human rights due diligence, the process of looking at human rights impacts of their business, but thinking about the potential risk to a defender of their business activity, that they need to think about all of you and make sure that they take steps to protect your rights from harm. And this also means that they have a responsibility to engage early in consultation with you as defenders and with your community members, and that this engagement is part of this respect for you. This is very important. So consultation, but human rights due diligence that is really focused on the rights and security of defenders. And again, this may sound very general, but the guidance goes into examples of good practices that companies take, having policies on human rights defenders and their rights, having really good mechanisms for defenders if they are at risk to be able to securely complain or seek assistance. And finally, and I think most importantly, in the area of access to remedy, we are very concerned as a working group at what we see around the world of companies and governments using the legal system to silence you. This is where we want to spend the next year focusing with you and with other civil society groups to really come up with solutions to stop this. We need companies to stop using the legal system to harass defenders. We need lawyers and to stop representing companies that silence defenders. We need judges and prosecutors who understand that this is harassment. It is not a true use of the legal system by companies. So again, the guidance starts to offer some solutions, but more importantly, we add our voice and recognize these problems and their seriousness. So we hope that the guidance, we will be using this to push governments and to push companies to become partners rather than those that cause harm to you. I know this will be it will not be easy, but it's just to say this is the purpose of this tool, and we look forward to your help and advice to us to make as to how we can best support you moving forward on general issues and on issues as you are discussing today of collective land rights. So I thank you, and I look forward to listening today. And if there is anything we can do with the guidance for you or in other ways, please do reach out to us. So again, thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Anita, for your introductory remarks and for introducing the guidance here to all participants in this meeting, and the key issues that you have raised about also the issue of the access to remedy, which is also at the core center, and it has been one of the key discussions in many of the events and sessions that we have participated during the last session of the forum. And the issue at the hope that the guidance become really a very important tool for dialogue and engagement of Indigenous peoples, also with governments and with the states. Thank you very much, Anita. So, lose more time, I will give the floor to our first speaker, our first voice from the ground, Mr. Mali Ole Kaunga from Kenya. He's a Laikipia Maasai, the founder and director of Impact, Indigenous Movement for Peace Advancement and Conflict Transformation, which is an organization that exists to organize, build, and strengthen Indigenous people's social movements at grassroots in northern Kenya. He has been actively involved in lobbying and advancing the interest of Indigenous peoples affected by the Lake Turkana wind power and the Isiolo mega dam at national and international level. Thank you very much, Mali Ole Kaunga, for joining us today. We really appreciate that you take your time. For your presentation, I would like you to share with us that you were in Glasgow for the COP26. What is your evaluation of the agreements made there and how that might effectively address the root causes of attacks of Indigenous rights defenders? I have also another question, but I think if you could respond to that question, I think I will put the next one after when you are finished. But please to try to be brief. I think if you could respond the question in 4 minutes or 3-4 minutes, so we have also some time for the next question. Thank you, Mali. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Lola, and thank you everyone else for joining in. Greetings from Kenya. I was in Glasgow, and there are quite a number of there was kind of some positive. First of all, it was great to have kind of in-person meetings, and we found to meet other Indigenous peoples whom we have not seen in person for quite a while. So it was breathtaking seeing brothers and sisters. One, it was frustrating at some point when the old question about human rights or gender are not really are being diffused rather than being incorporated into the old discussions or old negotiations. There's still a tug of war at this particular point of time, when we know that the climate change, the climate justice issues are actually human rights. So I felt frustrated that it's not really being accepted by the parties, that some of the parties, that it's a key issue. Secondly, and on a positive note, it was great that there's some sense of a collective kind of agreement that this need for urgent action to curb the global warming. Most parties agree that this is an urgent requirement, it's an urgent need, but it's frustrating to see that there's not that kind of serious commitment from the major polluters who are still not really agreeing to the key steps that are being advanced by Indigenous peoples and other communities being affected by climate change, especially on all questions about loss and damage. I found that one not really very being pragmatic from government, especially. We know that some of these major countries are still funding oil and gas investments in the global south. All these investments are coming from the major polluters. So I found it personally, I found it intriguing, or rather strange, that they are agreeing that this need to curb global warming, address issues and invest much more on clean energy. But you realize that investments, for instance, in Kenya, we still have oil exploration, and the resources and funding from these is coming from rich governments from the West. So in one hand, they are saying, okay, let's do this, but there is still exploration, there's still oil exploration, there's still investment. So it's, and also it is a little bit frustrating that I didn't find a lot of honesty when it comes to issues to do with national determined contributions, I don't think really a number of parties, a number of governments are really doing, declaring their contributions in a very honest way, especially knowing that if you bring an element of the principle of 30 by 30, converting terrestrial lands and waters into protected areas by 2030, and we know most likely these areas actually more is where indigenous and local communities are living. So we anticipate that for that to be met or to be achieved, there's a potential risk of indigenous people being taken off their lands. These are some of the, I don't know how much time I have, but these are some of the highlights. But also on a positive note, we saw a number of commitments from Scotland, from Belgium, and also a number of conservation organizations committing some resources to indigenous people. I think the mechanics of that coming through is a different thing, but I think we had that kind of positive contribution.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's good that you end with a positive comment, because I think the whole issue of the lack of real commitment, the frustration about the lack of incorporation of human rights, I think it's really frustrating and disappointing but we will see. There will be other speakers also after you who has also been attending the COP26. My second question is more about the Lake Turkana case. There has been currently some developments, and I would very much like if you could update us on the current situation there and the threats to the communities and why this case is so important.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lola. I think the Lake Turkana case has been a frustrating journey for the communities in that it has taken 7 years to come to conclusions. Highlights of the case are Lake Turkana Wind Power, which is a consortia of companies or investors from Finland and Netherlands, Denmark, UK, put resources into the biggest wind farm in Africa, which ended up taking 150,000 of land from the communities without due consultations of the community. So communities have been in court struggling to really secure back their land, but also to get their voice out there that we are not really being, the project does not really are in contact with that. So the case, a lot of the ruling of the case is, the court says that the land was taken illegally from the communities. So it was short of actually nullifying the title. It's more or less similar from the ruling that was also made in Norway a couple of months ago. So it says that the due process of acquiring land went against the legal provisions as provided under in Kenya under either the Community Land Act, but also under the National Land Act and Policy. And it gives the government of Kenya, the Ministry of Lands, the National Land Commission, the county government of Marsabit, and the Lake Turkana Wind Power. It gives them 12 months to rectify that anomaly. It is strange that a court allows an anomaly, an illegality, to be regularized. It's sanitizing, and it's actually one way of sanitizing an illegality. Why is it important? First of all, it's a precedent in Kenyan law that a powerful company, a small communities, a few communities without power have been able to challenge this. Oftentimes, they will think that we just need, communities just need to be silenced through some small kind of corporate social responsibility projects. But the nation connect of land is what communities they are fighting for. That their land, but also they are fighting that where is our voice in all this? And the reason the ruling also was short of nullifying the title for the fact that it respected also the clean energy investments. That, okay, the project is complete, we cannot stop the project, but you need to go back and negotiate in a fair way with communities and agree on how to move forward. We don't know what will happen, but it's precedent because there are so many other investments coming to Kenya. I mean, to come these lands like the Lamu, there's a huge investment in oil, other huge infrastructure coming. But I think it pushes community companies, investors, that they need to do due diligence before they can actually, you can't just assume that a land has been given to you by government. You need to go and take your own individual company due diligence to ensure that the investments are done within the bounds of law, but also as within the United Nations guiding principles.
Thank you very much. Yeah, congratulations, I would say, and also the importance of the precedents that this case make for other companies and other projects that are facing the same. So let's hope that it's duly implemented and really the communities and the negotiation with the communities start soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
From Kenya, we will go to Russia. And we are very pleased and honored also today to have here with us Yana Takasheva, who is a representative of the Shore Indigenous peoples of Kuzbas and Southwest Siberia region in the Russian Federation. For many years, Yana has opposed the barbaric coal mining in her region. Yana is a member of the local organization Revival of Casas Village and the Shore People. Welcome, Yana. Yana, can you share with us information about the situation of your community in Siberia and how the coal mining activities have affected them? Яна, the floor is yours.
Большое спасибо, госпожа Гарсия Аликс. Для меня большая честь сегодня принимать участие в семинаре. И большое спасибо, что дали возможность рассказать о моем народе и угольном регионе Кузбасс. Я из Кузбасса, это Кемеровская область. Аббревиатура Кузбасс переводится как Кузнецкий угольный бассейн. Если во всей России добывают приблизительно около 400 миллионов тонн угля в год, то в Кузбассе добывают порядка 250 миллионов тонн угля. Это около 70% российского угля. Уголь идет на экспорт в европейские страны и в азиатские страны. В моем регионе проживает, как вы уже сказали, шорцы, к которому я отношусь, нас 12 тысяч человек, и коренной народ телеуты, которых осталось всего 2500. И уголь, в последние годы уголь добывают открытым путем, то есть на поверхности, когда вскрывают плодородный слой земли, путем плодородный слой земли тяжелой техникой или взрывами. И эти взрывы, ядовитые вещества, они оседают на наших землях, на наших территориях. Как правило, к большому сожалению, угольные предприятия окружают наши шорские поселения. Так достаточно известно, общественный резонанс вызвало сожжение шорской деревни Казас, которое кейс, то есть дело этой деревни дошло до Комитета по ликвидации расовой дискриминации. При поддержке, мы подали жалобу в 2015 году при поддержке международных организаций. Это моя родовая деревня Казас, которая, к сожалению, была уничтожена угольщиками. 5 последних домов. 5 домовладельцев отказывались продавать дома угольным компаниям, и в течение 5 месяцев с 2013 по 2014 год сожгли все оставшиеся 5 домов. К сожалению, да, я хочу сказать, что добыча угля в моем регионе априори нарушает права коренных народов, права человека и нарушает право на безопасную, здоровую окружающую среду, которая недавно была принята, кстати, в резолюции Совета по правам человека. Мы все знаем. И, к сожалению, мы видим, в последнее время мы наблюдаем и нарастающие репрессии в регионе. То есть очень много нарушений, и люди, которые говорят об этих проблемах, о нарушениях прав на чистый воздух, на нашей территории, на наши земли. Мы говорим открыто это, и люди подвергаются угрозам, преследованиям и репрессиям. В течение многих лет моя семья была подвержена угрозам, тоже и репрессиям. Как я уже сказала, дом моего отца в этой деревне Казас также был сожжен. И этот дом ему достался от моего дедушки, это родовой дом. И мы в нашем регионе защита деревни Казас стала таким толчком в защите прав на здоровье, на здоровую благоприятную окружающую среду. То есть как бы сподвигнуло экологическому движению в нашем регионе. Сегодня люди стараются открыто говорить о нарушениях угольными предприятиями, но мы видим, все больше и больше происходит вот это репрессии в отношении защитников. Я, к сожалению, была вынуждена вывести свою семью, потому что в отношении моих детей были преследования и угрозы именно в отношении моих детей, когда начинали преследовать и точнее, велась тотальная слежка и беседы с Федеральной службой безопасности, беседа с центром так называемым по борьбе с экстремизмом и терроризмом. К сожалению, люди, защищающие свои земли, защищающие свои права своих народов, сегодня приравниваются в России экстремистам и террористам. И нас могут внести в список, например, экстремистов и террористов. Недавно был наш представитель коренного народа внесен в список иностранных агентов. Это очень ужасные тенденции в отношении правозащитников. И я только хочу поделиться сейчас со всеми слушателями ссылкой на открытое письмо в поддержку правозащитников из числа коренных народов России на английском языке и на русском языке. Это обращение поддержало более 100 международных организаций. Это обращение в различные международные механизмы, в том числе к российским властям.
Thank you very much, Jana, for sharing your experiences and the terrible impact of the coal mining in your village, in your region. And but at the same time, I think you had an optimism note about the impetus that this situation has given to the people to fight for their rights, for the right to a healthy and safe and sustainable environment. Thank you very much, Jana. From Russia, we go to Asia. And we are very pleased to have here with us today Mrinal Kanti Tripura, who is the director of Malaya Foundation, an indigenous peoples organization based in Dhaka, Bangladesh, that works on environment, climate change, human rights, and development issues. Mrinal has been engaged in development activities and indigenous peoples' rights issues since 1999. He's a former Indigenous Fellow in the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, and has been affiliated with various national and regional initiatives, including the Bangladesh Indigenous Peoples Network on climate change and biodiversity. Mrinal, welcome. And I would like also you to touch upon your takes away from your participation in the COP26. Malioli Kaunga already shared with us his assessment, but it will be great if you could also share with us your assessment of being at the COP26. And if you can respond to that question in 3-4 minutes, I have also another question to you. Mrinal, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lola. And thank you organizers for giving me the opportunity to take part in this very important event. So my internet connection sometimes gets disconnected.
Your internet, yeah, we cannot hear you very well.
Hello?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes, go ahead, go ahead.
Okay, so thank you. So yes, I was in Glasgow for the COP26 along with other indigenous friends for taking part in the negotiation to achieve something. And my personal realization in taking part in this kind of complex negotiation process, because here the parties are the states, the parties are the governments. So it is quite difficult for us to be listened by the states negotiators, because the states are also divided into different interest groups, because the states, they also have their own interest. So in this kind of situation, it's really hard for indigenous peoples to be listened to properly by the states. Nevertheless, because of the International Indigenous Peoples Forum on Biodiversity, which is the international forum, and they are very well organized and well coordinated in preparing for the negotiation, and in talking with the in negotiating with the state parties. So that's why I think the indigenous peoples got something from this negotiation. And what we saw during the COP is we really got attention from the key actors there. For example, the COP presidency and other key actors. So that, I think, is a big achievement. And as we understand, this is very complex process. So we should not get frustrated. We should have very good analysis. And if we have that kind of very good analysis, then we can understand where are what are the key factors, who are the main actors, who are in favor of indigenous people's issues, who are not. Then it is good to act on. So that way, I think we did well, and that's why we see something on indigenous people's rights and human rights in the preamble, I mean the Article 6 Paris Agreement. And also another important thing for me is the facilitative working group on local communities and indigenous peoples platform. That is the only platform we have under the UNFCCC right now, which we have worked well there. And that work plan for 2022 to 2024 is adopted by the COP. So that I think is important, considering the complexity of this process. Thank you, Lola.
Thank you, Mrinal. And thank you for sharing that. And I think it's important is to mention the great attention that Indigenous peoples got at the COP among different key actors there. And I think that is increasing in somehow over the years. We can discuss and analyze the results, but that is indeed a very important factor, because without visibility, it's difficult. You are not there. But when you are visible, when attention is called, I mean, it makes a difference in the perhaps in not right away, but in the longer term, on the midterm. But my second question is more about the situation at country level and your experience from Bangladesh, and what are the challenges faced by Indigenous peoples in upholding their land rights, in the context also of the agreements or the implementation of the agreements that came from COP26. How could these agreements, how do you see that those agreements could be implemented at the Bangladesh level?
Well, thank you. And as we know, the decisions taken at the COP, and we have to have a very good mechanism so that the decisions taken at the COP is properly translated into action on the ground. So that kind of mechanism, I think we still need to work, because I think it is still weak. And regarding the land rights, the collective land rights is not recognized. So it is really difficult for indigenous peoples to survive, because indigenous peoples, they don't have the land rights, I mean, individually, because we believe in collective rights over land and natural resources. And the life and livelihood of indigenous peoples is completely based on land and forest, I mean, the natural resources. So if these collective land rights and the control over the natural resources by the indigenous peoples is not recognized, then whatever decisions or good decisions are taken at COP level, it doesn't well reflected on the ground. And I mean, the indigenous peoples on the ground, they cannot achieve, they cannot get the benefit from whatever decisions taken at international level. So for that, I think what we need to do is, like, we also know that there is $1.7 billion for indigenous peoples, decided in this COP. Now the question is how the indigenous peoples will get access to this funding, because of the complex and difficult mechanism. Getting access to foreign funding by the indigenous peoples is really, we have to go through several rules and procedures which indigenous peoples organization cannot fulfill. So that needs to be considered, I think, so that they can easily get access to those funding. And at the same time, as we know, any resource creates new conflict. Resource is an opportunity. Again, resource can create new conflict. And as we know, in most of the worlds where indigenous peoples live in, there are already conflicts. As we heard from, as we learned from our sister from Russia and on other parts of the world. So I think that's why we need to emphasize on such an approach. We call it, we know the conflict sensitivity approach, because those actors, state and non-state actors, who comes to the indigenous territory in the name of addressing the climate crisis, so it may create new conflict. So for that, I think there should be very good analysis by the state and non-state actors, and including the indigenous peoples on the ground. So that can, I think, help the indigenous peoples to continue their survival. And so for that, I think we need to work at multi-track approach, the multi-track diplomacy approach. And also, as I said, the conflict sensitivity approach. And also, as we already have some good international standards that protect and respect and promote the indigenous people's rights, like we have UNGPs, we have ILO Convention, and other good international conventions. So these COP, whenever they decide any decisions, I think they should respect those already established international standards. Thank you, Lola.
Thank you very much, Mrinal. I think you raised very important issues: the access to funding, the need of good mechanisms in the ground, and of course the issue of resources, funding, conflict, and the need for a conflict sensitivity approach. I think is something that we need to reflect much more on. Thank you very much for sharing it with us. I'll go to our last speaker, and we have the pleasure to have an indigenous rights defender from Peru, who is part of the leadership of IDCEP, the Interethnic Association for the Development of the Peruvian Rainforest. And due to security reasons, he he has asked us not to mention his name. But I would like to ask you, also you were in Glasgow for the COP26 in the IDCEP delegation. What is your evaluation also of the agreements made there, and how those agreements might effectively address the root causes of attacks of indigenous rights defenders in Peru? And how can better protection of land rights could lead to an improved business conduct? Please, the floor is yours.
Muchas gracias, buenos días. Agradecer a los organizadores de este evento. Estoy muy contento de estar aquí y formar parte de esta conversación. Estuve en la COP26 de Glasgow, Escocia. Creo que hay acuerdos ambiciosos por parte de los estados. Nuestro encuentro cuenta el labor que realizamos los defensores de derechos humanos. Siempre estamos fuera y eso es nuestra preocupación. Nosotros venimos años exigiendo que no sea parte de esto, no están de acuerdo. Entonces, es justamente porque los acuerdos que los gobiernos establecen solo está mirando la parte de los rurales, ¿no? El bosque, pero están mirando las personas quienes habitamos ahí y cuidamos, no solo cuidamos que somos dos, ¿no? Por eso es importante nuestra participación en este tipo de espacios, ¿no? Ahora el tema es cómo estos acuerdos que establecen los estados se establecen mecanismos para apoyar la lucha de los pueblos indígenas, quienes estamos muchísimos años trabajando, cuidando nuestros bosques, luchando, ¿no? Para que interés despojen nuestros experiencias que reciben financiación que han hecho destruir nuestra Amazonía, ¿no? Por eso es siempre nuestra agenda en acuerdos reales que aterricen realmente en donde estamos nosotros en primera línea, enfrentando los grandes desafíos de deforestación por la expansión de monocultivos, no por el avance del narcotráfico, ¿no? Y riesgo la vida de primera línea y como figura reflectiva, ¿no? Pero también detrás de nosotros hay muchos hermanos que también viven la misma situación, ¿no? Entonces, por eso es importante un poco analizar las cuestiones principales de esta COP, ¿no? En esta COP se ha tocado bastante el tema de todavía sigue estando vacío. Entonces, eso es un poco nuestra preocupación, en resumen, de la situación que nosotros hemos visto, ¿no? Porque no estamos participando en decisiones de los estados, en los acuerdos que establecen la forma de que escuchen. Tuve problemas de audio, no sé si me escuchan.
Ahora te escuchamos.
Sí, la primera parte, ¿escucharon o nada?
Sí, solo la última parte, los últimos, el último minuto, últimos 2 minutos.
Ok, entonces, mencionaba que los acuerdos que establecen los estados solo es para ahora un discurso, porque no estamos participando de manera directa, solo estamos buscando la forma de que llegue nuestra voz por alguna representación. No formamos parte de las decisiones, porque los que toman los acuerdos son los gobiernos, son los estados, mientras esta sea la figura de nosotros teniendo dificultades de que nuestros realmente plasmen en los acuerdos. contentos con nuevamente alianzas estratégicas con otros pueblos indígenas a nivel global, ¿no? Entonces, eso es una herramienta para nosotros sumamente importante, ¿no? Seguir fortaleciendo nuestra alianza, ¿no? Porque finalmente los pequeños resultados o las alianzas que tenemos de aliados es lo que muchas veces tienen notado que los acuerdos que establecen los estados. Entonces, espacio, seguir fortaleciendo una estrategia con otros pueblos del continente que estamos enfrentando, ¿no? Para nosotros es sumamente importante también los derechos colectivos que tenemos los indígenas, ¿no? Nuestros territorios son de manera, ¿no? Significa que nosotros no podemos negociar. Por eso es que todavía tenemos bosques, tenemos recursos naturales, porque estamos cuidando de manera colectiva, de manera integral, ¿no? Y significa que la relación que tenemos los pueblos indígenas con los recursos, hay una relación. Por eso nuestra importancia de seguir cuidando. Entonces, pensamos nosotros que la lucha va a ser siempre los derechos de los pueblos indígenas. Nosotros tenemos casos emblemáticos en Perú, ¿no? Yo vengo de...
Because the connection is not very good, but thank you very much for being with us today and sharing your assessment and the issue of making this agreement a reality in the ground, a reality for Indigenous peoples, that those agreements really make a difference for the people in the front line, for Indigenous peoples who are at the front line of the climate crisis, but also the importance of building alliances and strengthening the alliances between Indigenous peoples. And perhaps this initiative, like this event today, also intends to help to support Indigenous peoples to build their own alliances.
Estamos sumamente preocupados porque nosotros venimos haciendo incidencia a nivel internacional en la Corte Interamericana de Derechos Humanos. Estuvo en Perú hace poco el Alto Comisionado de las Naciones Unidas, ¿no? Sobre la situación difícil que estamos enfrentando ahora mismo los defensores de derechos humanos. Uno, porque hay mucha corrupción en los estados, ¿no? Las instituciones que tienen que resolver esta situación son cómplices de las empresas, son cómplices de las actividades ilícitas, entonces no hay dónde acudir en estos momentos, ¿no? Ahora mismo hay una invasión de territorios por el tema narcotráfico, hay muchas personas amenazadas de manera colectiva. A pesar de los informes que presentamos a los gobiernos o entidades correspondientes, no hemos tenido acción inmediata en estos momentos. Por eso nos preocupa muchísimo, seguimos siendo amenazados. Entonces nosotros necesitamos o seguimos buscando el respaldo y la colaboración de los aliados. Muchas gracias.
We have finished the presentation of our speakers, and we will open we will have some time for questions or comments from the participants. And as I said, everybody can write the question or the comment in the chat or in the Q&A function of the chat. And please remember to introduce your name and to whom you want to address your question. So the floor is, or the chat is open for questions and comments.
Hi, we have a first question here from the floor from John Connington. He's having a question for Mrinal from Bangladesh. He asks if he can talk a bit more about the conflict-sensitive approach and the case of Bangladesh.
Mrinal?
Yes, Lola.
Can you respond to the question about, explain a little bit more about the conflict sensitivity approach?
Yes, thank you, John, for asking the question. Yes, when we say conflict sensitivity approach, as we all know, that is also known as the do no harm approach. So, so that whenever any initiatives, any program or activities is taken, the indigenous people's land or territory, and that program or activities affects the indigenous peoples, in that case, it is important to be conflict sensitive. Otherwise, as I said, there will be new conflicts, and there will be, if the conflict is properly and constructively not dealt constructively, then it will turn to violence. So that's why we emphasize the approach, the conflict sensitivity approach for the actors, for the stakeholders. And one of the approach is the local capacity for peace. You know, and there's also some implicit ethical message that that comes from the intervention by the actors from outside. So that's why the actors need to understand the context very well. And also the one most important thing is, in everywhere, in any context, there is conflict. And whenever any actors or any intervention comes in, they cannot be neutral. So that's why they also become part of the conflict. So that's why they need to understand it very well. And again, at the same time, in every context, there is also some initiative by the local people or local institution for peace. There is inbuilt, so they have the capacity. The local people, they also have the capacity for peace. So that needs to be strengthened or supported, so that we can transform the conflict from negative to positive, something constructive, that we also call peace building process. So that is sustainable, and it is just peace. When we talk about peace, we talk about just peace, and that means because of the intervention, outside interventions, the relationship between the conflicting parties can be developed, so that it doesn't deteriorate the existing conflicts. Thank you, Lola.
Thank you, Mrinal.
We don't really have any more questions from the chat. Please put your questions to the speakers if you have any.
I have a question perhaps for Mali Olekaunga. I mean, following perhaps both your frustration and And the positive note at the end, how do you think the agreements and the COP26, even with these weaknesses on the strong reference to human rights, do you think are usable by indigenous rights defenders at country level, can be useful to support your struggle or to use them in your own struggle?
Thank you, Lola, for your question. And I think, yeah, you are right. I think there are opportunities within the whole framework in which indigenous, environmental land rights defenders can actually use to defend territory, to defend rights, but also to articulate other climate or other environmental interests. For instance, I think the whole evidence that the indigenous peoples' territories are actually very important in terms of offering natural solutions, or even for their own indigenous peoples' traditional knowledge. I think it offers a number of kind of opportunity for them to leverage and use that to engage with their own national government. They are also, if you link the whole discussions at the COP26 and link also to other processes that are already going on. For instance, in Kenya, we've got the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights that recognizes the right to land, and also that also deeply recognizes the whole element of consultations. I think it gives human rights defenders an opportunity to engage, because this some of the decisions, some of the engagements at the global level are being backed by existing laws at the country level. But also it gives the kind of, for instance, Kenya right now is more or less preparing their RED plus kind of action strategy. And they have been heavily in consultation of indigenous people. Even today, I just saw an invitation to actually participate in the final kind of giving comments, giving ideas. And the whole issue about FPIC and also recognizing Kenya government have actually even using, although there are no legal issues supporting FPIC, but it's actually being applied even without a law backing it. It is being applied in one way or the other. Looking into the issue about forestry, in whereby the training of forest rangers, right now there's a training on human rights to the rangers, so that to increase that kind of, they understand that their rights within the whole issue about conservation. And the other thing also is offering some of these international processes, creating an opportunity for indigenous people and the human rights defenders to organize themselves, so that they can push for issues at the global, regional, and other in a collective manner. So I think there are quite a number of opportunities in terms of giving human rights defenders an area where they can reinforce themselves, but also connect and share experiences. So I think there are a number of opportunities that that can really be advanced, and also looking and linking that to the Lake Turkana wind case. I think the whole ruling is a kind of a warning to companies and government that rights must be respected, and because companies or investment in one way or another are actually fighting back through the use of money, the use of manipulation of law in many instances. So I think it's a warning that our rights must be respected, and the proper consultations must be done, because if the due diligence processes can be respected, this can minimize conflicts between investment, government, and indigenous, which means that also the threats to indigenous, the human rights defenders can actually be at a lower level. There will be this kind of confrontational between the parties involved. So I think there are a number of opportunities that all these processes do over. But there's still a lot of issues that need to be done at the global, regional, and national level to really increase the voices of also to increase to ensure that the respect for human rights defenders and also the respect for territory, because I think the human rights, the environmental and land rights defenders are actually fighting for the common good, things that are good for the whole world, for the government. They are not. They are fighting for a common space, a shared space that respects human rights. So these are some of the issues that we're really fighting for.
Thank you very much, Mali.
We have some few questions who have come in between. Now people are starting to warming up. There's a question here from Franza Jenna. In terms of rights provision in key outcomes of COP26, especially on carbon finance, in Article 6, there is no explicit recognition of land, territorial, and resource rights, and no requirement for free, prior, and informed consent. Surely there's a risk that the growing focus on carbon markets now will increase instances of lands and resource disputes and conflicts over carbon rights, and therefore attacks on defenders. How can we ensure COP outcomes don't bulldoze over already established indigenous people's rights? That was a long question. I don't know if somebody wants to respond to that.
Who wants to respond to the question?
Lola.
Yes, Mirinal.
I can try to respond. Which one? The question from Francis Jenner?
Yes, the one I just mentioned.
And also, I think Maurice question. Always negotiators dealing with negotiating positions. Why is it we are complaining that Glasgow is a failure? I think I can start there from here.
You're welcome to take both questions.
Yeah, from my experience, and also working on conflict transformation and conflict sensitivity, as I said, for that to understand the entire picture, the whole picture clearly, we need to do this kind of conflict or contradictions in systemic way, because as I said, the climate change and also and the negotiation process is very complex, as we have different states or governments, the parties with their own different interest, positions, and demand. So we have to understand what are the position, what are the interest, and what are the demands of all the actors or stakeholders. So when we can understand those things clearly, positions, interest, and demands or needs, so we need to understand where to negotiate. And also it should be dialogue rather than negotiation. Because when we say negotiations, some arguments are there. But when we say dialogue, we have some agreement, because we are ultimately fighting to save the planet. So now we have to understand what are the interests, and there are many layers of conflicts. Like we can say there are developed or industrialized countries, there are less developed countries, there are island countries, most vulnerable countries. So there are many divisions with their own many layers of interest. So and we cannot compromise with our need or demand, no, because we cannot compromise with our life and livelihood, with our identity. For example, the indigenous peoples, we cannot compromise. So now what we need to understand is what are the interests which can be negotiated or which can we fulfill each other. I mean, that way we can think of this process. So, and that's why the carbon markets, yes, indigenous peoples are the ones who still protect the forest, because without forest, without land, indigenous peoples cannot survive because they don't have other options for survival. So for their own sake, they have to maintain the biodiversity. They have to keep the forest alive, because without forest, there is no food. And they cannot maintain their indigenous knowledge system or food system and their languages, because everything depends on the land and forest and nature. So, and by that, we also contribute for keeping the temperature of the planet, no? Is very interlinked, and we cannot isolate the climate change from other things, because the indigenous peoples, they think holistically. No, the indigenous people's worldview is different, and that only save the planet. So if the world leaders, if the key actors who are in the COP 26 COP or UNFCCC, so if they really understand that we have to save the planet and these are the proper way, then I don't see any problem for agreeing with the indigenous people's demands. And so here, we all say, all the state parties say, oh, we want to save the planet. That is their position. No, they say it publicly, but we need to understand what are the lying, different layers of interest, why they cannot come together. So there is the points where we can negotiate or discuss. That way, I think. Thank you.
I think a brief note to that. The whole question, the whole risk of commodification of the, or even converting the whole debate about climate change to financing, or there's a huge risk, especially when focusing so much on carbon credits. Already, it has already created the carbon credits cowboys. People, organizations and individuals making frontways into territories, and then saying we're protecting this forest because it's helping, of course, to reduce or as carbon sinks. But indigenous peoples and other communities are actually not are doing it for the common good. They are protecting forests, their landscapes, because of the common good. But reducing it to more or less a financial thing, it creates a risk that because the whole issue about carbon credits, for instance, in Kenya, is not well grounded with communities. The knowledge and how the mechanism, how it works, is actually within a certain small domain. Is a conservationist or other people who actually trade. A good example is within the Electrocana wind power. It is a common component. They say they will be removing a certain number of metric tons of carbon from the air, and they will be paying a certain, but the communities are not aware about that. It has not been fully declared to communities. It's more or less an issue between the company and government. So to me, that is a risk, because we will be moving into another front line whereby forests will be or landscapes will be protected, not because of their common global goods or the global benefits, but simply reducing trees and natural resources to the amount of money you get from that tree or from that forest. And that can bring another front line into what we have seen when you compensate communities for this. There are risks, there are benefits of compensating communities, but there are also risk of creating other kind of conflicts when communities start fighting because of the carbon money flowing into communities. For instance, a good example is I've had a number of conservation organizations saying, okay, we'll be giving each and every community or conservancy 10 million Kenya shillings per year out of the you conserving your territory, your forest. That's not a problem, that's a benefit. But how that money inflows into communities can end up creating another issue that communities, unintended consequences that have not been properly analyzed. And I see some other questions. I don't know, from Maurice. I see somebody from Maurice.
There's a question to you, Ketal Doyle and Ilse Rankin. I don't know if we have time, Lola. Should we take the question to Malaya Conga? There was just a question from Ketal Doyle that said that asked if the court decision on Lake Turkana open up, give hope for the communities in terms of consultation and consent and land rights for the future. And there was another question that asked that there was claim from the LTWP, Lake Turkana Wind Power project, that they consult with the people in Sarima in the spirit of the IFC Performance Standard 7. And what do you think about this claim and how the consultation was done?
Could you respond that question in 2 minutes?
The notion of consultation between the companies and communities is very different. There are different communities there using different structures of decision making. So what they did, they brought communities into a hotel and they let them sign they were told to sign in some forms because it's for refund for their travel. And they use that one as evidence that there was a meeting. That's just a meeting, an event. It's not really consultation because it was a one-day event. That's not a proper consultation. So even under that, even under IFC or any other procedures, but also does the ruling of Lake Turkana give hope to communities? Yeah, it does. It actually does give hope in one sense, in the sense that it sets a precedent to say that communities have right to raise issues about how their land is being taken away from them. Secondly, it also gives hope that a number of investors, a number of companies will learn from this, and they will now consider different mechanisms of engaging with those communities. And I think there's a number, there's quite a number that it gives hope that the communities now will give they now have to invest in how and decide how they want to engage with the company, but also what amount of their land they want. The community has never been against the clean energy. They were questioning the amount of land in which company it wants, 150,000, which they need for future development or as a buffer zone, which they could not really explain to what they really meant by future development, while the community needs it now.
Thank you very much, Mali. I think we will end with a question in Spanish.
Sí, gracias. Gracias por la pregunta. Ya queda unos minutos. Nosotros hemos buscado el diálogo entre la empresa, el Estado y los pueblos indígenas, pero estas reuniones han justificado las reuniones o las intenciones que hemos tenido. Las empresas han tomado como justificación el daño que han hecho en los territorios y la violación de los derechos colectivos, ¿no? Dando la imagen de que están trabajando de manera articulada con las comunidades, que no hay ningún tipo de problema. Entonces, con estas experiencias, tener acercamiento hacia las empresas y el Estado es un poco complicado, porque muchas veces en vez de resolver los problemas hemos empeorado, ¿no? Porque las imágenes de la reunión que tenemos, el acercamiento para poder explicar o pedir explicación o que respeten los derechos colectivos que tienen los pueblos indígenas, solo han servido para imagen, para seguir captando más fondos de parte de los estados, ¿no? Entonces hay que tener mucho cuidado cuando se pretende tener un acercamiento empresa, pueblos indígenas y estado, ¿no? Muchas veces lo toman de manera negativa y eso es para nosotros fatal, porque a pesar que hacen grandes daños, despojan territorios, y la imagen de las empresas muchas veces es a nivel internacional muy positivo. Pero nosotros que vivimos en la primera línea, estamos en los territorios, creemos que eso no es verdad, ¿no? Por eso siempre estamos sacando a la luz todos los atropellos que estamos viviendo los pueblos indígenas de parte de los estados y la empresa. Muchas gracias.
A little bit late, so I will pass again to Anita to give us some concluding remarks. Anita, you have been listening to the whole event, to the different assessment and experiences of Indigenous peoples from the 3 regions, and as a member of the working group, and also I think in the context of the roadmap for implementation for the next 10 years, how do you see that the role of, what will be the contribution of the working group? What could be some of the key contribution that the working group could do in that situation?
Thank you so much, Lola. And again, thank you to our speakers. I've taken many notes about your reflections today. And I also put some resources in the chat. The first thing I hope is that when we are actually able to go and visit with you in your homes, in your actual communities, what we see and hear today is what we see and hear from you directly. And I hope that when we write our reports and speak to your governments and speak to companies, that we are merely reflecting your wishes and recommendations, which many of we've heard today. Again, focusing on how can companies better use human rights due diligence? What does meaningful consultation mean? And more importantly, one area that we keep seeing as a problem is the refusal of governments and of companies to use FPIC, free, prior, and informed consent, as the basis on which any activity would ever take place. So, and I was also, it was very interesting to hear Mrinal speak about conflict sensitivity, because again, we really focus on not only consultation, but how businesses need to understand that their actions can have consequences for communities in terms of either helping maintain peace, but if they don't use human rights due diligence, then they may actually do harm and cause more conflict in communities. So just to say, many of the reflections today are ones that we hope that we can continue to bring to the attention of states in the United Nations. But in terms of the next 10 years, it is our hope that we can work with you as rights holders and as communities on a few things. One, today there was a lot of focus on discussing climate justice and transition. We know this is an area that we have to do much more to focus on. So one of our biggest hopes is that we will start to, with your help, really be more stronger and more clear on the connection between business, human rights, and climate justice for the reasons you have stated. That would be one big hope. A second one I mentioned a minute ago is the issue of really free FPIC and how we make sure that that is properly interpreted and properly used by companies and by states, and that they do so clearly. This is a big challenge. And then a third is that when we think of human rights due diligence, we think of access to remedy, that it all begins first with people first, and that by asking people and by asking Indigenous people and Indigenous communities, what do you want, but what are the potential harms of business activity, and what should the remedies be if there's a harm, that this is the way to move forward better for everyone. This is our biggest challenge, but it's our biggest hope that we can begin to move that message. So climate justice, free, prior, and informed consent, and third, that consultation and engagement at the beginning is the way forward for human rights due diligence. So again, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Anita. And I think we can close the event with your words. But before closing, I want to express again my gratitude on behalf of all the organizers, our gratitude to the speakers today. It has been an honor and a pleasure to have you here. And of course, to all the participants and also to the interpreters that have helped us today. So thank you very much. And of course, this is a conversation. It's not an end, it's the beginning, and we will have a lot of other opportunities to continue discussing some of these key issues that has been brought here to the table today. Thank you very, very much.